Dune. Oh no. So this is Kal Kat, the Kal Katster, and this is the 22nd. We all thought that that Jackass was coming out today. No, Jackass. They postponed it last minute, beginning of last week, to February. So no Jackass tonight. So I ended up going to see another movie. So the XD version of Dune at noon. Dune at noon. Dune at noon. I do remember the David Lynch one and the books. So yeah. Yeah, Star Wars, of course, borrows liberally from Dune, including mentioning spice mines, a desert planet, and all that. And the idea of the chosen one son guy from the Emperor, an emperor or some sort of person coming out of, to lead the resistance or whatever. Yeah, it's basically Star Wars. But yeah, Star Wars was not first. He was reading Frank Herbert, so yeah, Lucas was definitely reading Frank Herbert and a number of other things. So yeah, they weren't first. Sort of like when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and the newer generation was like, they're copying the Sorcerer and Apprentice thing from Star Wars. And no, he read Tolkien too. He borrowed it from that. Also, that's a trope. There's always the apprentice and the master and all that stuff. That goes way back to ancient Greece probably, or further. But ancient Greece, yeah, and mythologies and stuff. So yeah, that's been around forever. Yeah, having a wizened wizard guy is Arthurian legend too, and, stuff like that would have been done that as well. Yeah, Dune. The previews were kind of boring. There was a remake of Scream that's coming out, and they made it look like an actual horror movie. Forgetting, of course, the original was a parody of horror movies. They made an actual horror movie out of it. Yeah, there was no. There was this weird Michael Bay movie called Ambulance, in which these bad guy EMT dude wants to save his wife or something, so he sneaks inside. They're gonna rob a bank, and there's a big shootout and stuff, and they get away in the ambulance, which is essentially a cheesy Kal Kat short story from years ago that he took. They made a movie out of it. So I never finished the story. It was stupid. But, okay, that doesn't make sense. Not going to do that. He apparently found it and made a movie out of it. Yeah, it doesn't. No, Michael Bay. That doesn't work. Yeah. Psst. Anyway, the David Lynch one did have Patrick Stewart in it and Sting. But yes, back in '84. I was 13 when that one came out. There's also a guy called Quinn's Reviews on YouTube who does a lot of the Dune stuff. If you want to learn about Dune, the Dune series and the whole series, he breaks it down. Series, including an 8-minute preview of this one that he saw. I didn't go to the 8-minute preview. I went to the actual movie premiere. I didn't need to go and see the preview thing. And yeah, apparently Brian Herbert was one of the producers. Herbert's son. The sequels aren't as good as the original. The sequels also curiously borrowed from, I don't know how they did, from the Planet Tom saga, the Canary Space saga. Before it was actually official, there was a House Canarian in that one. And it was a coincidence. It's like my idea was, but I named the Canary the Corinne after someone named Corinne from the 90s, and the book House Corinne, apparently he also named this race people after somebody that he knew that was named Corinne. So that's what happened to some other person. So it was a weird coincidence. Yeah. But yes, they House Corinne. But yes, so yeah, it was a coincidence. Yeah, so I had to change it to Canary to not be confused with Dune's sequel books. Yeah, obviously in the early 2000s. So Canary Space is not to be confused with Dune. It has really nothing to do with it. Probably inspired by some elements of it, though, and in some ways, some of the politics and alien races and that kind of thing is kind of similar. in some ways, but I think a lot of sci-fi tropes have already done it too. I mean, the idea of warrior women races goes back to the Amazons, Greek. The idea of a misogynistic all-male race goes back to probably ancient Greece as well, ancient Vikings as well, ancient other groups, and they get beat up by another group of highfalutin characters. So yeah, there's a lot of yeah. So it's not related to my stuff at all. Every science fiction author is inspired by other ones. So that's the gist of it. So the original saga, it's a weird idea. Frank Herbert was an odd guy. You can look up his backstory. He was a science fiction author, writer guy lived in Oregon, and near Bend, and I've been there in the Oregon that area, up there, up to that through that area, and I've seen what he was seeing in the movies, in the books. But it's curious that he thought the Oregon desert was like Arabia, which is weird because it isn't really. It's more like sort of like Lower Mojave or something, almost like Utah up there. It's not. It doesn't look like Arabia at all. Not really. Mojave looks more like Death Valley looks more like some parts of that. But yeah, the actual African desert is quite a bit different. Yeah, with all these odd names for things like Bene Gesserit, the priest ladies, and some people that maybe some of the young people that are like their 20s that saw Star Trek Picard, and they're like, oh yeah, it's ripping off Mass Effect 3, but it's also ripping off Dune. Star Trek Picard mentions these the Romulan agents, Romulan warrior women on the planet that are clearly like Amazonian types, but they're also Bene Gesserit. They're Dune characters. The absolute candor idea and all that. It's Dune. They're cribbing from Dune, and which is funny because Patrick Stewart was in both. Yes, a lot of people have been inspired by Dune. So. Although they toned down the misogyny part of it, because the books are a product of the 60s and 70s, and drugs, lots of 60s and 70s drugs. Although my half brother did want to give me his Dune collection, which was all faded, I didn't take it though because I think I had some home somewhere. It's his collection of Dune books. I didn't take them. Probably should have. Because I had my own somewhere. But yeah, the Dune saga. It's been a while. Since I've looked at any of them. I think the last one from way back. I didn't read any of the prequels really, but I did have the sequels. But I did have. I think the last one I read was like, gosh, I don't know, 30 years ago, and it was called Chapter House Dune. Chapter House Dune. It was one of them. That was after God Emperor Dune and the other one. Yeah. So, and there was Children of Dune, God Emperor Dune, Chapter House Dune. I think Chapter House was the last one. Whatever was the one where the Dune turns into a water planet again. They go back and stop it. It's like 1,000 years later or something. It's expanding a universe. Only Asimov's Foundation was as vast as Dune. And the Galactic Empire thing, which you might say, oh, that's like Star Wars. No, Dune thought of it first. So did Asimov. Asimov actually predates Dune, so Foundation is before Dune. Yeah. It was like 10 years earlier, in the 50s. Foundation. And they made a new show out of that on HBO. I have not seen it. I don't want to have HBO Max again just to watch Foundation. So, yeah. On to Dune. The new one. So there's all this backstory that you probably don't need to know at all about going into a Dune spinoff. Or Dune remake by David Villeneuve. The guy that did Blade Runner 2049, which I also kind of liked. It worked. It was an interesting follow-up to Blade Runner. That is subverted expectations. No, it was although semi controversial. Stone Gremlins guy has reviewed the Dune movie, I just watched his review because it was 3 minutes long. He didn't like it. I did not look up the Rotten Tomatoes on this. I thought leaving it that it was the best movie of 2021, and that it kind of addresses 2021 in it. The symbolism is fairly obvious given the climate of the post Iraq and Afghanistan war time periods. They're clearly doing a political message about that in the movie. They have these dragonfly things that are like helicopters, basically. They're flying around through the desert, and it's like, okay, yeah, they're totally doing that. How they can do that? I mean, the original books, they didn't really have like action set pieces with a city blowing up and fires everywhere. They didn't really do that. The books were more cerebral. They would describe battles and stuff, but yeah, they clearly changed it up for the movie because they wanted to condense, like, it does say part 1 in the credits, so note that this is a 2-part movie serial. I'm assuming they filmed part 2 as well, and they're just going to wait a year to release it. So this is part 1. So it's like a miniseries. There was a miniseries on the cartoon on Sci-Fi Channel years ago that this movie is taking a little bit of liberties from, as well as the other one. But that miniseries wasn't as good as the David Lynch one. It had some parts of it were. They got up to Children of Dune. They got up to book 2 in the miniseries, and then stopped. It had a cameo by one of the cast members in Children of Dune. But yes, the wasn't me. Anyway, so we have, that was, what, 15 years ago, the Children of Dune. But yeah, so we have the sequel with characters that are following fairly closely the dialogue in the books. The Stone Gremlin guy complained about the dialogue being stiff. Well, it is in the books. It's all the same, all right notes. Not the same notes, but the right notes. Although the David Lynch one was clearly done to be a little more weird and trippy, and this one is just like, okay, this is supposed to be a semi-realistic, like, future society, thousands of years in the future, where humanity is spread to all different planets via a spacing guild and an empire that controlled Atreides and Harkonnen controlled the planet, and then they left. Sort of like, think of it as like the Iraq and Afghanistan and the Sunnis, and they left the other ones. The other guys left the Sunnis in charge. The same kind of thing. Or Afghanistan, we left Afghanistan. Same kind of thing. So think of it that way, then it's like, oh, okay, it makes sense. So it isn't really what they're saying. They're not saying that's a parallel to the Afghan occupation, but clearly that's what they were implying in the story, but not in the books. In the books, the books clearly written in the 60s were about Vietnam. It was a different war with Vietnam, and it wasn't even really any. There was a different aesthetic. They were after that. They made the and he threw out names because Frank Herbert just didn't know or care. So Jesuit sounds like Jesuit, even though they're not supposed to be Jesuits. That would be weird. And and we have characters like Duncan Idaho, who is the most American name you could ever think of. They might as well be Patriot Man. But that was a character in the story. It's just odd. Paul Atreides kind of sounds Greek, I guess, or Latin, something or other. So the Baron Harkonnen, of course, is in it. The guy playing the Baron is really good. Damn it, come on. Stone Gremlins guy didn't like the Baron Harkonnen. Oh, the villain's dumb. Oh, he didn't get it. The villain's he's just so, he's over the top. He would be a really good, if they do a live action Spider-Man, he should play the Kingpin, because he would be great as the Kingpin. If they do a live action Spider-Man introducing him. He should play that guy. He won't, but they should get him. This new guy, I'm not familiar with the new actor that was playing Paul Atreides. He was okay. Yeah, he was a little weak, but I think it's because he's supposed to be playing a character that isn't quite all there yet. Messianic, Moses-y type of character. This is how he was written. And as pointed out on the Quinn's reviews, as he pointed out, he's not supposed to be a hero. He's the anti-hero. So if they're reading it as like, oh, he's like Luke Skywalker, but he's not. It's like, he's an anti-hero. He's not. Yeah, he's not automatically heroic and powerful and stuff yet. He's an anti-hero, and he has to go through challenges to become more like a hero. Eventually, he becomes leader of Arrakis, becomes the 100%. So he becomes, and then he becomes the leader of like the whole thing. He eventually defeats them in the other books. Becomes like in charge of everything. Becomes like almost a deity to them, like a demigod. He becomes really powerful. And then his son is the one that actually leads the other groups later on in the sequel to Chapter House, Children of Dune and Chapter House. So there's like this, there's like this so he's not meant to have a one-dimensional thing where I'm just the hero or I'm just the villain or whatever. He's an anti-hero. He's conflicted. He's all the stuff that's going on with him because he's half this sort of psychic character because they have, which is silly, but sure, science fiction, why not? I explained away some psychic characters in my stories in the Canary space. I had them say like, well, they weren't necessarily psychic in my stories. They had figured out everything there's to know about human physiology because they've been studying us. And they figured out how to tap into the human impulses of the brain. So they weren't necessarily psychic. They just figured out the science beyond magic, kind of the science that's indistinguishable from magic, Arthur C. Clarke. And they figured that out. They were able to map the brain engrams and whatever, and figure out what someone was thinking, and then play it back to them until they could actually control their minds. It's not exactly psychic. That's more like possession. It's more like creepy sort of alien stuff, which is actually creepier. It's like, oh, they figured out how to do that. So that's a little different than Dune. Dune is more like the spice makes them. The spice drug. It's clearly a drug. The spice drug from the worms, from the worm's eye and stuff. The spice melange makes them high and gives them psionic powers. Basically, because it was the '60s and psychedelic. Sir, the '60s, yeah. That's what they did in the '60s. So, anyway, so the spice melange, the worm sign and all that, and they did throw the weirding way in there too. It was mentioned near the end. This weirding way. They did some flashbacks since it is part 1 of 2. We'll see how well part 2 is done. I liked how they did the spaceship stuff. The ships look like nothing from any other thing before. They kind of resemble weird monolithic things. The main spacing ships are the guild ships, which they don't show any insides of very much at all. They don't show a spacing guild thing floating around in this one. Maybe it's in the sequel. They control they fly using the spices navigator things. Fly the ship, like in the David Lynch one. They showed it in the David Lynch one. But they didn't bother even going into how the ships just fold space. They just do, which is neat because then they just go, okay, hard science fiction. We're not gonna bore you with the details. We're not gonna come out with some ridiculous like overblown, like okay, they're gonna use the full drive to go this and that, and they're gonna explain about how the math works and all that. No, they're there. They can do it. Oh my goodness. At one point, one of the ships shows up in orbit and goes, and he's all, my God, or whatever. So yeah, it's like it's just there. They just work because they do, and that's all you need in a movie like this. You don't need to explain how the shield thing works or the generator thing works. I like that they used lasers at some points, but only to cut through shit. So at one point they cut through a wall thing, and they almost cut somebody leg off, and they get them out of the way really quickly. So they don't have laser cannons, and they have personal shields, but they don't have laser cannons. That's in the book. They have still suits that work that he puts on. They have the mother as with child in it, and just like in the book, it's going to be his little sister who becomes one of the Fremen witch people later on, which is in the Lynch version. So the plot basically centers on this hero's journey of this Paul Atreides, who's half Bene Gesserit and half of the House Atreides, and he has to go to Dune with his father after his friend Duncan Idaho went there, which is a little different from the book. They kind of moved things around a little bit. Duncan Idaho is supposed to appear later in other books. Yeah, I won't give anything away, but they changed things around a little bit. So they go to the planet, and there's the Emperor guy sent them to the planet to die. Basically, he wanted to take out his rivals, the Atreides people. So the Harkonnens sent them to die. Because the Harkonnens screwed up the planet and then they left. The Atreides people were then sent to fix what they'd left. And some things happen to some ships and other stuff happens and they end up doing stuff. And then there's an assassination plot on the Emperor guy, which doesn't work, even though it's a clever idea of putting the poison tooth thing in the guy's mouth and having him gas everybody in the room. And they might say, oh, they're ripping off Star Trek Nemesis. Actually, that scene in Star Trek Nemesis ripped off Dune. The one where they all die from the poison on the ground. And they ripped off Dune. It was in the Dune book. So, yeah. There's a lot of things to rip off Dune. But the one thing with the pool, the glowing and stuff, and the Mass Effect 3, and they were saying, oh, that's from Mass Effect 3 from Star Trek Picard. No, they were ripping off Dune. Mass Effect 3 ripped off Dune 2. So, yeah. As well as, yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot of Dune. We have the sandworms, too. The sandworms are way bigger in this one. At one point, there's knives made from sandworm teeth. And at one point, there's a scene where they spit. They said that on the planet, actually, the spit is spitting is giving their life water to because it's a desert. It's clever. It's an honorific of the Dune Fremens to spit, and then the life water is like, the fans of the movie, let's not do the spitting thing. Okay, that's gross. Let's not make that a thing. Especially not with the COVID going on. It'd be a bad idea. But yes, so yeah, it's fine. It works. I liked it. It was fine. There was hardly anybody in the theater. There were 5 of us on opening day. That isn't a good sign. I guess it's streaming as well if you want to stream it, but see it in theaters. I saw it in HD with the seats that vibrate. Shit, cool. A lot of scenes that they showed in the trailer, they showed like it was evening, so they explained that the suns were hot, so it was like evening or early morning, and that's why it looked a little blanched out and dulled. But it's still, yeah, because if they showed it blazing hot, they did do scenes where it was blazing hot. But yeah, they were treating it like the Arabian desert, even though it was not. With people that weren't Arabian, and I think there were some in there, but Egyptian and Arabian people in there. Because they weren't in the David Lynch one. They left them all out. They made them all white guys, which was really strange. But yeah, I don't think Frank Herbert realized what he was doing, what he was getting into with that one. Oh. The Fremen is the Freeman, of course. And there's a character called Freeman that got changed to Anderson, I believe. And then they changed the ship to the Freeland in Canary Space as well. They changed the names around because, nope, too close to Dune, we got to change that. So before Distant Destiny became Canary Space, not to be confused with Dune. Yes, you're not going to confuse the two. They're not related. No. Lucas ripped it off more than I ever did. Yeah, Spice Mines. Come on, Lucas. Come on, Spice. We're going to get into the Spice Mines for sure. Yeah. So, but yes. And Jakku was Dune as well. Other Dune. Yeah. So. Other scavenger that has powers that comes out. Mary Sue like from Matador. Yeah, Rey from Star Wars is basically Paul Atreides. This is like pretty much, and Luke Skywalker before. Skywalker, yes. Well, we won't go into that, but yes. So Dune, in terms of movies in 2021 that I've seen, best movie of 2021, just because. Well, yeah. What about what's been out? What's been playing? Part one of this movie, sci-fi movie, special effects, all of that. So yeah, thus far. Anyway, dude, yeah. I'm going to say 3.5 to 4 stars. Yeah, 4 stars. Why not? Yeah. So Dune. And considering it's supposed to look like it, it's very true to the books. It's the first third of the book, basically. Done as a movie. Okay. Doesn't jump around several years, although it probably should. The second one should technically take place 5 years later. But yeah. It does have a cohesive story within this one story, though, so that there's not a... Yeah, so it is cohesive, so you can watch this and then watch part 2. It's a reimagining, and it works. Of course, some of the combat is a little silly, but not intentionally. They have particle weapons and shields and things like that. Sure, some of the fans will over that. Some of the sci-fi fans will be on about that, explaining how that might work. But considering that it was written in the 60s when computers were gigantic and reel-to-reel tape was recording audio, he was actually ahead of his time. At the time, he was thinking, okay, lasers aren't going to be like laser guns; they're just going to be lasers that cut things. And like they're going to have blaster pistols, they're going to have like shields and stuff, and psionic powers and stuff. Dude, from taking spice. They didn't really go into the spice production thing too much in this, because it's a little weird, but they will in the next one. So. Anyway, so Dune.